This is Lauren Steiner with the Robust Opposition, and this is our first show of 2019, and my guest tonight is Branko Marcetic, who is a staff writer with Jacobin magazine. And he wrote an excellent article on Kamala Harris, which we just finished discussing. And now we're going to talk a little bit about his work, dissecting Beto O'Rourke, who is the new darling of the chattering class, the liberals, the resistance, the Hillbots, whatever you want to call them, supported by the Third Way, member of the New Democrat Coalition, but not a member of the Progressive Caucus in Congress, which is very telling. David Sirota wrote an excellent piece in Capital in Maine, basically dissecting 167 of this man's votes. He was in the top 20% of Democrats voting against the Democratic agenda. Yeah. So why don't you talk a little bit about what you uncovered about Beto O'Rourke, who is the darling of the liberals, and I can maybe fill in some of the blanks.
Yeah, honestly, I'm to be honest, I'm really puzzled and kind of baffled at the kind of really angry reaction that not just my piece, but Sirota's piece and Sid Jelani's piece and Elizabeth Brunig's piece, and I think I've got everyone. Maybe there's one or two others, on Beto's record, because I don't think they were. To be honest, I think I for one have been far more critical of other politicians. I felt if anything I was too soft on him, especially after Sirota did a much more extensive look through his record. So I was kind of surprised at people's kind of hyperventilation over this. But basically, I mean, I looked at parts of O'Rourke's record, not as thoroughly as Sirota, but I mean, there's his stance in Israel. He did speak out and vote against the bill to fund Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system, and he actually. He was basically challenged by the Israel lobby, and he went back on this in record time, and since then has become sort of a very steadfast kind of supporter of Israel. And Palestinian activists reportedly say they can't really get in touch with him. He doesn't really want to hear their concerns. So that's one example. Another example that I cited was that with Trump. The Republicans weren't able to pass the financial choice bill, which was the sort of the bill that was meant to gut Dodd-Frank once and for all. And so what they did was, when they weren't able to pass it, they broke it up into something like 16 other bills, where they sort of took all these individual provisions and they put them in these other bills, and they and that way they would just try and pass it piecemeal, which was semi-successful. And actually, O'Rourke voted for, I think, about 2 or 3 of those bills, basically just chipping away at Dodd-Frank. He voted to also, one of them was to get rid of the Volcker rule, for example. And then
he voted for the GOP bill to empower banks to shield themselves from examination, that would reduce individual audits, that would deregulate stock exchanges, that restricts regulators' ability to monitor high-speed trading, to weaken arguments for banks to weaken requirements, for banks to inform their customers of sharing of their financial information with third parties. He delayed the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau regulations and weakened lending disclosure protections for home borrowers. He co-sponsored a bill to repeal the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's action against auto lenders. Yeah. And he did a lot of other things regarding the environment. And, of course, that's what Sirota pointed out. For those people who don't know, Sirota wrote the article in Capital in Maine, which I described, but he also wrote a tweet in which he analyzed Beto's campaign contributions, and he had made a pledge that he wasn't going to take any fossil fuel money, any money from fossil fuel executives. And the first thing that Sirota noted was that he was the second largest contributor, receiver of oil and gas money in Congress after Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz was the first. And when I saw that tweet, I thought it was a little bit disingenuous, because we know that he's in Texas, and oil and gas is a big industry in Texas. and it's a big employer, and a lot of people are likely to work in that industry. And so some of these people are ordinary workers, which was pointed out promptly by Neera Tanden and others. Alex Koch in Sludge, Real Sludge, he went on to further parse down these donations to see that there some of like 23 of the donations came from oil executives. So that he did, in fact, really, break his pledge. So, we can really dive down into the nitty gritty. And I'm not as concerned about people accepting money. I mean, if you look at, the Sunrise Movement is talking about Kathy Castor, who was appointed head of the Select Committee on Climate Change. And she and her husband took money from the fossil fuel companies. Well, look, Ro Khanna, who's my favorite congressperson by far, and who's authoring so much progressive legislation and really using the bully pulpit of Congress. If you look at he's the third richest Congress member in California, and his wife is the one with the money. If you look at where their money is invested, he's got hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars with energy companies and fossil fuel companies and pipelines, etc. So when I get him on my show, I'm going to ask him if he wants to divest from those. But to my mind, it's really more about what you do when you're in office, how you vote. And his voting is not good on the environment. He voted to repeal the 40-year-old ban on oil exports, which ultimately happened, and Obama bragged about it. And now we're the #1 oil exporter in the world. We exceeded Saudi Arabia. And that is because Obama quadrupled fracking, which has devastated our country and very specific states, including his own Texas. He voted against the bill to prevent drilling in the eastern Gulf of Mexico. He voted to protect utilities who caused the California wildfires. And now PG&E has just been sued for deaths related to the latest wildfires up in Paradise. He voted against nutritional labeling at restaurants. He voted to repeal the country of origin labeling law. And one of the worst things that he did, because I fought the TPP, was he voted for TPP fast track, which enables the president to fast track the approval of that trade agreement without having a full congressional debate. So what do you think of that?
I mean, I think it's all bad. I think the other thing with O'Rourke, I mean, his voting record is one thing. It's a very important thing. I think also we should be very aware of the fact that his candidacy is being pushed by a certain group of people, which is ex-Obama staffers and donors and, people and Clinton people as well, who are, those are people who are most excited about his potential candidacy. For some people, that's not a red flag because they say, well, I mean, if Obama likes him, if they think he's, the sort of second coming of Obama, then great. I think for anyone who has been following politics relatively closely for the last, let's say, 9 years, I think people have to realize that this is not a good thing. It's actually a very bad thing. Obama was not a great president, and we keep seeing every time Trump does something outrageous, people get very, very upset about it, whether it's the coddling of the Saudis and the Yemen war, whether it's the treatment of migrants at the border, whether it's the sort of the way that he coaches up to various authoritarian leaders around the world. And there's always a precedent from the Obama administration. About famously, the most famous example was when the photo of the kids in a cage somewhere in some detention center came out, and people, said, "Oh, this is disgusting. What has Trump done? Look what he's done." Those photos were from 2014 when Obama was president. That's one example. The Yemen war, that started under Obama. Obama was relentlessly friendly to the Saudi royals, the Saudi government. So I think the fact that the people who ran the government under Obama believe that O'Rourke is the sort of Obama 2.0 should make us very concerned, because the last thing we need is Obama 2.0. We need someone who's actually willing to stand up to the Republican Party and the people who fund both parties and who's actually willing to make quite a radical break in policy from what the Democrats have been doing, which Obama did not really do.
Yeah, I mean,
he was a very cautious president.
He's also married to a daughter of a billionaire real estate developer, and he crushed the progressive challenger, Sima Hernandez, who's running again for something, I'm happy to see. His wife is also on the board of charter schools, so I'm sure he's for education privatization.
Mm-hmm.
And, what needs to be, what Zaid Jilani pointed out that needs to be mentioned, this is not because he comes from a conservative district, mind you. He comes from El Paso, which is a very progressive district. So I don't even think the stands that he was taking were to benefit his constituents. And he only passed 3 bills. 2 of them were veterans bills, and 1 of them renamed a post office and a courthouse. But you know what? I don't hold that against him so much, because I learned when I interviewed Alan Grayson many years ago, who was known as the Amendment King after Bernie was known as the Amendment King, is that it's very hard to pass a bill.
Right.
So that's why it's easier to pass amendments. So if you want to, for people like Barney Frank told me at the Democratic convention that Bernie never did anything, and I said he's the Amendment King, and he goes, oh, well, nothing that he did was substantial, and that was so ridiculous for him to say that, and really made me hate Barney Frank even more than I already hated him, before he said that. But, yeah, he's also being called the White Obama, which is, that's kind of a little bit racist. And Israel, he opposes the BDS movement. He thinks he's made statements to say that the UN is against Israel, even though, like you said, he opposed the Iron Dome, the funding for the Iron Dome. He then supported the largest Israel aid package in history after he was taken to the woodshed by AIPAC. And he also voted in favor of that anti-sex trafficker bill that you don't like, FOSTA and SESTA.
There's another one that was that actually would basically put kids in jail for, I think, like 15 years for not just sexting, but attempting to sex. I don't even know what that means.
I know. How do you attempt? How do you attempt? You either do it or you don't do it, right?
It's a good question. Yeah. So that's very bad. The Blue Lives Matter bill that basically turns trying to injure a policeman or even killing a policeman into a hate crime. He voted for that as well. So there's a lot. I think O'Rourke strikes me as a guy who didn't think that he was going to get the platform that he suddenly has. Didn't think he was going to run for president. Was aiming to run in Texas. So I think probably his record, his more conservative record, probably reflects that. But again, why? There's no need to roll the dice on this person who all the indication we have from him is that he has a relatively right-leaning voting record. Even Matthew Iglesias, who's not exactly an anti-establishment bomb-throwing leftist or anything, he's he recently came out with a piece, or maybe a couple of weeks ago, came out with a piece that talked about how if you look statistically at it, O'Rourke is, one of the more conservative voting Democrats, so even statistically, that it comes through. And it's not exactly, this is not some sort of crazy radical attack on Beto O'Rourke. It's just a plain statement of facts.
And the worst thing I think about it is Neera Tanden's tweet, basically after these 3 articles came out, for her to try to blame it on Bernie and ask, the Bernie Sanders supporting authors, for her to blame it on Bernie and then ask Bernie to denounce it. That is outrageous. That woman is just, I don't know who's worse, her or Hillary,
Right. Well, the funny thing is, the line that's kind of been peddled by Neera Tanden and a bunch of other people has been that, I guess Bernie Sanders got us all in a room, all of us that wrote these pieces, and he said, I need to stop this Beto O'Rourke guy. He's coming for me. He's exciting the young people. He's good looking. He's handsome. He has good hair. He looks, he's a cool guy. I need to prevent him from stealing my thunder. So I want all of you guys to go out and write your own pieces that criticize his record.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Right, which, I mean, that's the job of a journalist anyway, is to scrutinize a politician's record. But what I find particularly funny about that accusation that's been sort of repeated by a number of different outlets now, I've read a number of authors in various publications saying that, these are sort of organized attacks on Beto O'Rourke. We know that in, I think it was June or July, Third Way, the centrist kind of think tank, had a gathering with a number of presidential aspirants and Democratic operatives and all manner of other people that are in the Democratic Party, where they sort of sat around and talked about a game plan to stop Bernie Sanders. We also know that, the Clinton campaign, because of the DNC leaks, and the Podesta leaks, the Clinton campaign would regularly feed stories to reporters, sort of shop stories around to different reporters that was unflattering about Bernie Sanders. There's one where they were going to have a conference call with a bunch of reporters, and they talked about how they would feed them this sort of information that was not flattering in some way. So to me, this sort of smacks of projection. It's the Democratic establishment, for lack of a better term, projecting onto sort of this inchoate, diverse array of leftist publications what they themselves are doing and want to do to Sanders, which is to sort of gather around and figure out a game plan to stop him.
Yeah.
But let me say on the record, I've never spoken to Bernie Sanders. I did not get this assignment for anyone other than my editor. He didn't get any marching orders from Bernie Sanders either. So,
yes, and are you getting orders from Russia?
No, yeah, right. No, as far as I know, I don't believe so. The funny thing is that Jacobin is the only publication in the world that I think gets accused of getting money from both Putin and the CIA, which is so it's you cannot win. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, if we were getting money from Russia, I would be annoyed that he's not paying us better.